Sometimes the smallest sentence carries the greatest weight, because the people who need it most have spent years without hearing it. Nathan Calloway had built an empire worth billions of dollars. Yet that morning he stood on a quiet Manhattan sidewalk wearing a faded gray jacket, worn denim jeans, and sneakers whose cracked soles had once belonged to another man. His expensive watch rested inside a locked safe miles away. His phone had been replaced with an old prepaid device. Even his posture had changed. The confident stride that had commanded boardrooms around the world was gone, replaced by the slow, uncertain walk of someone accustomed to being overlooked. For years, Nathan had watched people become instantly warmer the moment they recognized his face. Doors opened before he reached them. Smiles appeared before he spoke. Every compliment sounded rehearsed. Every handshake felt calculated. Somewhere between magazine covers, television interviews, and endless meetings, he had forgotten what it felt like to be treated like an ordinary human being. That morning, he wanted to remember. The autumn air carried the scent of roasted coffee and fresh bread as commuters hurried past without making eye contact. Some brushed against his shoulder without apologizing. Others crossed the street before reaching him. None of it surprised him anymore. By noon, he found himself standing outside a neighborhood restaurant that had escaped the polished perfection of the city's luxury dining scene. The sign above the entrance had faded slightly over the years. Small flower boxes rested beneath the windows. Families laughed inside while the soft clatter of dishes drifted through the glass. It looked like the kind of place where people still remembered birthdays and favorite orders. Nathan reached for the door. Before his hand touched the handle, another customer stepped around him and entered first without even acknowledging his presence. Nathan smiled to himself. The experiment was working exactly as expected. Inside, conversations filled the room with comfortable warmth. Fresh soup simmered somewhere behind the kitchen doors. Coffee steamed from ceramic mugs instead of paper cups. A hostess glanced toward Nathan for less than a second before quickly looking away. Her practiced smile disappeared almost immediately. Another employee whispered something near the register. A middle-aged customer frowned briefly before returning to his lunch. Nathan quietly waited. 1 minute passed. Then another. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions with less silence than this. Finally, the restaurant manager approached with polite caution. "Sir," he said carefully, "I'm afraid every table is reserved today." Nathan looked around. Several empty tables stood near the windows, untouched except for folded napkins catching the afternoon sunlight. He nodded gently. "I understand." There was no anger in his voice. No argument. Only quiet acceptance. He turned toward the door, already knowing this would become another story confirming everything he believed about success and appearances. Then a calm voice floated across the room. "Excuse me." It wasn't loud. It didn't interrupt anyone. Yet somehow every other sound seemed to soften around it. Nathan turned slowly. A young waitress with neatly tied chestnut hair and kind blue eyes stood beside a small corner table carrying 2 menus against her apron. Her name tag read Evelyn Carter. She didn't rush toward him. She didn't stare at his clothes. She didn't study his worn shoes. She simply met his eyes with the same steady professionalism she offered every guest who entered the restaurant. She placed one menu gently on the table and offered a warm smile that carried neither pity nor curiosity. For a brief second, Nathan forgot he was pretending to be someone else. "We have room right here," she said softly. He hesitated, almost expecting someone to correct her. No one did. Evelyn pulled out the chair with quiet grace and waited patiently while he decided. Nathan slowly sat down, still searching her face for the familiar signs he had learned to recognize over the years. Suspicion, judgment, calculation. There were none. She handed him the menu as naturally as if he were any businessman stopping by for lunch between meetings. Nathan looked up, uncertain why his throat suddenly felt tight. Evelyn smiled once more before speaking 3 simple words that stopped time inside a man who believed nothing could surprise him anymore. "You matter, sir." Evelyn Carter noticed the change almost immediately. The moment the man sat down, conversations quietly resumed around the restaurant, but something invisible lingered in the air. People still glanced toward the corner table before looking away again, as though kindness shown to someone wearing worn clothes somehow demanded an explanation. Evelyn had seen that look many times before. She simply refused to let it influence the way she did her job. She placed a glass of ice water on the table before setting a fresh cloth napkin beside it. "Would you like a few more minutes with the menu?" she asked with the same gentle professionalism she offered every guest. Nathan looked up, still unable to shake the feeling created by those 3 unexpected words. "Thank you," he answered quietly. "I think I am ready." His voice carried an educated calm that did not quite match his appearance, but Evelyn never paused to question it. People carried stories they rarely shared, and she had learned years ago that appearances often concealed more than they revealed. "What do you recommend?" Nathan asked. Evelyn smiled thoughtfully. "If you have had a difficult morning, the chicken noodle soup usually helps. If you skipped breakfast, the turkey sandwich is filling without being too heavy. And if today has been harder than most days, our apple pie has made more than a few people smile." Nathan could not remember the last time anyone had recommended food based on how he might feel instead of how much it cost. He closed the menu. "Then I will trust your judgment." "Excellent choice," Evelyn replied. "I will have everything out shortly." As she walked toward the kitchen, Nathan quietly watched her greet another family, laugh with an elderly couple celebrating an anniversary, kneel beside a little boy to ask whether he wanted extra pickles on his burger, and patiently help an older customer read the dessert menu after noticing him searching for his glasses. There was nothing dramatic about what she did. No grand performance. Just dozens of small moments stitched together by genuine respect. A few minutes later, the manager approached Evelyn near the coffee station. Nathan could not hear every word, but he noticed the concerned expression. "You know he might not be able to pay," the manager whispered. Evelyn answered softly enough that only fragments reached Nathan across the room. "If someone is hungry, we feed them first." The manager sighed before returning to the register without another argument. Nathan lowered his eyes. During 20 years of building companies, he had approved charitable donations worth millions of dollars. Yet somehow that quiet sentence carried more weight than any public announcement his foundation had ever released. Soon Evelyn returned with a steaming bowl of soup and a sandwich arranged neatly beside it. The aroma reminded Nathan of childhood weekends before success had transformed every meal into another business meeting. "Please be careful," Evelyn said with a warm smile. "The bowl is very hot." Nathan thanked her again. After tasting the first spoonful, he realized he had been eating expensive food for years without actually slowing down enough to enjoy it. For several peaceful minutes, neither of them spoke. The restaurant moved around them with comfortable rhythm. Coffee cups clinked softly against saucers. Afternoon sunlight stretched across the wooden floor. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone laughed. It all felt remarkably ordinary, and for Nathan, that ordinary feeling had become unexpectedly precious. When Evelyn returned to refill his water, Nathan finally asked the question that had quietly occupied his thoughts since she welcomed him inside. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "Of course. Why did you help me?" Evelyn looked genuinely surprised. "Because you walked through the front door." Nathan smiled faintly. "Most people did not seem very happy to see me." She followed his glance around the dining room before returning her attention to him. "People notice clothes before they notice character. I try to notice people first." Nathan remained silent. Evelyn continued arranging the salt and pepper shakers with practiced care. "My father used to tell me something when I was little," she said gently. "He said that every person who sits across from you is carrying a story you cannot see. If that is true, then kindness should never depend on appearances." Nathan looked down at the simple meal in front of him, suddenly realizing that the greatest test taking place inside the restaurant was no longer the one he had planned that morning. Without intending to, Evelyn Carter had quietly begun testing the man hidden beneath the disguise, and for the first time in many years, Nathan was no longer certain he would pass. The lunch crowd slowly thinned as the afternoon settled over the restaurant with an easy, familiar rhythm. Sunlight drifted across the wooden floor, painting long golden lines beneath the tables, while the rich aroma of fresh coffee replaced the scent of grilled sandwiches. Nathan Calloway remained seated in the corner, no longer rushing to leave. For years, every minute of his day had been scheduled with relentless precision. Assistants measured his calendar in 5-minute increments. Investors expected immediate answers. Executives waited for his approval before making decisions worth millions of dollars. Yet somehow, the quiet simplicity of this small neighborhood restaurant felt more valuable than the glass towers where he usually spent his days. Evelyn returned carrying a fresh pot of coffee. She noticed his cup was nearly empty before he even asked. "May I?" she said with a warm smile. Nathan nodded. "Please." She carefully poured the coffee, never spilling a single drop. "Would you like another slice of pie?" she asked. Nathan laughed softly. "You seem determined to make sure nobody leaves hungry." Evelyn shrugged with a gentle smile. People remember how they felt long after they forget what they ordered. Nathan looked at her for a moment before asking, "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 4 years," she answered. "Long enough to know which regular customer secretly likes extra whipped cream and which one pretends they do not enjoy dessert." Nathan smiled again. "You notice everything." Evelyn glanced around the dining room. "It is part of the job." "No," Nathan replied quietly. "I think it is part of who you are." She did not answer immediately. Instead, she folded a clean towel with careful hands before speaking. "My mother used to tell me that every person hopes someone notices them for the right reason. Most people are simply waiting for proof that they matter." Those words settled over Nathan more heavily than she realized. During countless interviews, journalists had asked him about leadership, ambition, wealth, and success. No one had ever asked whether he felt noticed as a person instead of a public figure. Somewhere along the way, Nathan himself had stopped asking that question. Evelyn excused herself to greet a newly arrived couple celebrating their anniversary. She congratulated them by name, remembered where they preferred to sit, and even placed 2 extra strawberries beside their cheesecake without being asked. The couple smiled as though they had just been welcomed into a friend's home instead of a restaurant. Nathan quietly watched every interaction. There was no difference between the kindness she offered an elderly veteran living on a fixed income, the young parents counting every dollar, the business consultant working through lunch, or himself. Every guest received the same calm attention, the same steady respect, the same sincere smile. It was consistency, not performance. That realization fascinated him. His entire experiment had been built upon one assumption. People changed their behavior depending on what they believed another person could offer them. Evelyn seemed completely untouched by that instinct. A few moments later, the manager approached Nathan carrying the check. He placed it gently on the table with an uncomfortable expression before walking away. Nathan opened the small leather folder. The amount was modest, but his pocket contained only a few dollars. He had intentionally left every credit card behind to complete the experiment honestly. He closed the folder slowly, already expecting the awkward conversation that would follow. Before he could stand, Evelyn appeared beside the table. She looked at the unopened check, then at his face. She seemed to understand everything without a single explanation. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently. Nathan hesitated before answering. "I may have made a mistake today." Evelyn remained perfectly calm. "That happens." Nathan took a slow breath. "I do not have enough money to pay for lunch." Several nearby conversations continued without interruption. No one else seemed to notice. Evelyn simply looked at him with the same peaceful expression she had worn since the moment he entered the restaurant. There was no disappointment, no suspicion, no embarrassment. She quietly reached for the leather folder, closed it, and placed it beneath her arm. Then she offered the same warm smile that had welcomed him through the door. "Then next time," she said softly, "you can simply come back." Nathan stared at her in complete silence. For years he had believed generosity was measured by numbers printed on checks, charitable reports, and public donations. Yet standing before him was a woman whose greatest gift required no fortune at all. She had trusted a stranger when doing so offered her absolutely nothing in return, and Nathan suddenly realized that the lesson he had come searching for had only just begun. As the afternoon light slowly faded beyond the restaurant windows, Nathan Calloway remained seated long after the last bite of pie had disappeared from his plate. The leather check holder rested quietly beneath Evelyn Carter's arm somewhere behind the counter, as though the unpaid meal had never existed. Every instinct he had developed during decades of building companies urged him to explain himself, to reveal his identity, to settle every misunderstanding immediately. Instead, he remained silent. For once, silence felt more honest than power. Evelyn returned with a fresh cup of coffee without asking. She placed it gently on the table before sitting the sugar container beside it. "This one is on the house," she said with a smile. Nathan looked at the steaming cup. "You have already done more than enough for me today." Evelyn shook her head. "Kindness is not something that runs out." Those simple words settled into Nathan's mind beside the three she had spoken earlier. They were not clever. They were not dramatic. Yet somehow they carried more wisdom than countless leadership seminars he had attended over the years. He wrapped both hands around the warm mug, letting the heat reach his fingers. "May I ask you another question?" he said quietly. "Of course. Have people ever taken advantage of your kindness?" Evelyn smiled with surprising calm. "Sometimes." Nathan frowned slightly. "Does that not make you more cautious?" She leaned lightly against the back of the empty booth across from him. "It makes me more careful, but it does not make me less kind." Nathan studied her face, searching for hesitation. There was none. "Why?" he asked. Evelyn glanced toward the front window where a father was helping his young daughter zip her jacket before they stepped outside into the cool afternoon. "Because I would rather be disappointed by a few people than become someone who cannot trust anyone." Nathan lowered his eyes. The sentence reached somewhere deeper than he expected. His entire business career had been built upon contracts, verification, background checks, and carefully measured risk. Somewhere along the journey, caution had quietly become distance. He could no longer remember the last time someone trusted him without expecting something in return, or the last time he had trusted someone without first calculating the outcome. A sudden burst of laughter echoed from another table as two elderly friends finished their coffee. Evelyn excused herself to refill their cups before returning a few minutes later. Nothing about her pace suggested she was rushing through another workday. She gave every conversation the same quiet attention, every guest the same patient smile. Nathan noticed something remarkable. She never looked at her watch. She never seemed impatient for the next customer. She was completely present wherever she happened to be. "You really enjoy this work, do not you?" Nathan asked. Evelyn considered the question before answering. "Some days are difficult. Some people are impatient. Some days my feet hurt before lunch." She laughed softly. "But every table gives me another chance to make someone's day a little lighter. That seems like meaningful work to me." Nathan looked around the modest restaurant again. The walls were simple. The furniture had clearly been repaired more than once. Nothing about the place suggested luxury. Yet the atmosphere carried something many five-star establishments never managed to create. People felt comfortable here because someone genuinely cared whether they did. Nathan quietly reached into his jacket pocket and removed the few dollars he had intentionally carried that morning. He placed them carefully on the table. They covered only a small portion of the meal. "This is everything I have with me today," he admitted. Evelyn gently pushed the bills back toward him. "Keep it." Nathan blinked in surprise. "I owe the restaurant." "You do," she agreed with another warm smile. "Not today. Someday." Nathan stared at the folded bills before slipping them slowly back into his pocket. No negotiation. No embarrassment. No lecture. Only quiet faith from someone who had no reason to believe she would ever see him again. As he finally stood to leave, Evelyn walked him toward the front door just as she did for every departing guest. The late afternoon breeze drifted inside as she opened the door. Nathan paused before stepping onto the sidewalk. "I never even thank you properly," he said. Evelyn smiled with effortless sincerity. "You already did." "When?" Nathan asked. "When you looked people in the eye all afternoon instead of looking down." Sometimes gratitude does not need words. Nathan stepped outside into the cooling Manhattan evening, carrying no receipt, no business card, and no proof that anyone would believe what had happened inside that small neighborhood restaurant. Yet with every step away from the building, he felt as though he had left something behind that had been weighing on him for years, and for the first time since beginning his unusual experiment, he found himself wondering whether tomorrow's greatest surprise would belong not to the waitress who had welcomed a stranger, but to the billionaire who was no longer certain he wanted to remain hidden. That evening, Nathan Calloway returned to the quiet apartment he had rented under another name whenever he wanted to disappear from the world. It was a modest place overlooking a narrow street where delivery trucks replaced luxury sedans and neighbors greeted one another without recognizing faces from financial magazines. He placed the old jacket across the back of a chair and stood silently by the window. Manhattan glittered in the distance, its skyline filled with towers that carried his signature on contracts, blueprints, and ownership papers. Yet none of those buildings occupied his thoughts. Instead, he kept hearing the calm voice of a waitress who had spoken to him as though his worth had never depended on what he owned. Sleep came slowly. Every conversation from the restaurant replayed with surprising clarity. He remembered Evelyn Carter recommending soup because she thought he might have had a difficult morning. He remembered her refusing his money when she realized it would leave him with nothing. He remembered her saying that kindness was not something that ran out. Most of all, he remembered the quiet certainty in her eyes. She had never doubted her choice for a single moment. Before sunrise, Nathan made a decision. The experiment was not over. If anything, it had only begun. Early the next morning, the executive floor of Callaway Technologies buzzed with its usual precision. Assistants carried tablets through polished hallways. Conference room doors opened and closed with practiced efficiency. Nathan stepped from the private elevator wearing a tailored navy suit, polished shoes, and the familiar silver watch that instantly announced his place in the business world. Every employee who passed greeted him with perfect posture and carefully chosen words. "Good morning, Mr. Callaway. Your board meeting begins in 30 minutes. The investors from Seattle have already arrived." Nathan answered politely, but something had changed. For the first time in years, he noticed how every interaction seemed rehearsed. Respect arrived before conversation. Deference appeared before connection. No one asked whether he had slept well. No one simply wished him a pleasant morning without expecting another instruction in return. During the board meeting, charts filled enormous screens. Revenue projections climbed upward. Executives celebrated another record-breaking quarter. Someone praised Nathan's leadership. Another congratulated him on expanding into 2 additional states. Normally, he would have been fully engaged. Instead, his attention drifted toward a small handwritten note he had tucked inside his portfolio before leaving home. On it, he had written 4 simple sentences from memory. "You matter, sir. Kindness is not something that runs out. People notice clothes before they notice character. Every person hopes someone notices them for the right reason." The numbers on the presentation suddenly felt strangely incomplete. Profit could be measured. Market share could be measured. Even reputation could be measured. But how did anyone measure dignity? After the meeting ended, Nathan asked his longtime assistant, Daniel, to remain behind. Daniel had worked beside him for almost 12 years and knew every detail of his schedule. "Cancel my afternoon appointments," Nathan said. Daniel blinked in surprise. "All of them?" Nathan nodded. "Including the interview?" "Especially the interview." Daniel hesitated. "May I ask why?" Nathan smiled faintly. "Yesterday someone reminded me that I have been studying business for most of my life, while forgetting to study people." Daniel looked puzzled but did not question him further. Less than an hour later, Nathan found himself sitting once again inside the same modest sedan he had driven the previous day. This time, however, he wore neither expensive confidence nor deliberate disguise. He simply carried quiet curiosity. As the familiar neighborhood came into view, he slowed the car a block away from the restaurant and watched through the windshield. Evelyn had just arrived for work. She carried the same worn canvas bag over one shoulder and paused before entering the building. An elderly man struggled to fold his walker after climbing from a city bus. Without hesitation, Evelyn crossed the sidewalk, greeted him with a warm smile, and helped him without drawing attention to herself. The man thanked her before continuing on his way. She never looked around to see whether anyone had noticed. Nathan smiled quietly. Yesterday had not been an extraordinary day for Evelyn Carter. It had simply been another ordinary day lived according to extraordinary values, and Nathan realized that the greatest measure of character was not what someone did when the world was watching, but what they quietly chose to do when no one expected anything at all. The following morning unfolded differently from every other morning Nathan Callaway had experienced in years. Instead of entering the restaurant in disguise, he remained across the street inside his parked sedan, watching life move with quiet honesty. There were no cameras, no reporters, no shareholders waiting for a statement. Only ordinary people beginning another ordinary day. Evelyn Carter unlocked the restaurant with the same calm expression she had worn the afternoon before. She greeted the baker delivering fresh bread by name, accepted the warm boxes with both hands, and thanked him as though he had given her something priceless instead of completing another routine delivery. A few minutes later, she noticed a young mother struggling to push a stroller while balancing 2 paper grocery bags. Without hesitation, Evelyn stepped away from the entrance, held the restaurant door open, and carried one of the bags inside until the woman regained her balance. The entire exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. There was no audience. no expectation of recognition. Nathan quietly smiled. The kindness he had witnessed yesterday had not been an exception. It was simply her way of moving through the world. After waiting another 15 minutes, Nathan finally stepped out of the car, wearing his usual tailored suit. He no longer carried the appearance of someone forgotten by society. The polished leather shoes, perfectly fitted charcoal overcoat, and understated elegance of his watch immediately attracted attention as he crossed the sidewalk. Customers entering the restaurant instinctively moved aside to let him pass. The hostess greeted him before he reached the front desk. Her smile arrived effortlessly. "Good morning, sir. Welcome." Nathan thanked her politely before scanning the dining room. Evelyn stood near the coffee station arranging fresh mugs. She looked up as the front door opened. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Nathan expected surprise, perhaps even recognition. Instead, she smiled exactly as she had the day before. The same warmth, the same calm sincerity. She walked toward him carrying 2 menus beneath her arm. "Good morning," she said. "It is nice to see you again." Nathan felt something shift inside him. Not because she had remembered him, but because nothing about her tone had changed. Yesterday, she believed he owned almost nothing. Today, she saw an apparently successful businessman. Yet she greeted both versions of him with identical respect. "May I have the same table?" Nathan asked. "Of course," Evelyn replied. "It has been waiting for you." She led him to the familiar corner booth beside the window. Sunlight streamed across the polished wood exactly as it had the previous afternoon. She placed a menu in front of him before pouring a glass of ice water. "Would you like the soup again?" she asked with a knowing smile. Nathan laughed softly. "You remembered. People remember kindness," Evelyn answered. "I think meals should remember people too." Nathan looked around the restaurant. Several employees who had barely acknowledged him yesterday now seemed eager to offer assistance. One straightened the centerpiece on his table. Another asked whether the room temperature felt comfortable. Even the manager approached with a noticeably different expression. "Welcome back, sir," he said warmly. "Please let us know if there is anything we can do for you." Nathan thanked him, but his attention remained on Evelyn. She alone behaved exactly as she had before. She neither increased nor reduced her kindness. There was no performance, only consistency. As she prepared to leave for another table, Nathan spoke quietly. "May I ask you one last question?" She turned with patient curiosity. "Certainly." Nathan held her gaze for a long moment before asking, "If I had walked and dressed the way I am today yesterday, would you have treated me differently?" Evelyn smiled gently, almost as though the answer had always been obvious. "No," she said. "Yesterday you needed a table. Today you need a table. Everything else is just clothing." Nathan lowered his eyes, unable to speak for several seconds. In every boardroom he had ever entered, appearance had shaped expectations before a single word was spoken. Yet this young waitress had reduced all of that complicated world to one quiet truth that seemed impossible to argue with. She picked up the coffee pot and prepared to serve another guest before pausing one final time. "People change clothes every day," she said softly. "Character usually takes much longer." As she walked away, Nathan realized that he had come to the restaurant intending to discover whether kindness could survive without wealth. Instead, he was beginning to understand that genuine character did not notice wealth in the first place. For the next hour, Nathan Calloway remained at the corner table, but the meal itself had become almost irrelevant. What truly held his attention was the quiet rhythm of Evelyn Carter's day. She never hurried past a customer simply because another table needed service. She never interrupted an elderly guest searching for the right word. She listened completely before responding, as though every conversation deserved its own moment. Nathan began noticing details he would have ignored only days earlier. When a construction worker apologized for counting loose dollar bills before paying, Evelyn simply smiled and asked whether he wanted a coffee refill before leaving. When a young businesswoman accidentally spilled iced tea across the table while reading emails, Evelyn calmly replaced everything without allowing embarrassment to linger. When a little girl proudly handed her a crayon drawing instead of a tip, Evelyn thanked her with the same genuine appreciation she showed to every paying customer. There was no difference, no invisible scale measuring who deserved more attention. Every person entered as a guest and left as someone who had been seen. Nathan quietly wondered how many opportunities he had missed throughout his own career because he had been too focused on results to notice people. As he finished his coffee, Daniel, his longtime assistant, stepped cautiously into the restaurant. He had followed Nathan's instructions, but clearly remained confused by the unusual request. Dressed in a dark suit, carrying a leather portfolio, Daniel immediately recognized Nathan near the window and walked toward him. Several employees glanced at the newcomer with polite curiosity. Nathan stood to greet him. "Thank you for coming," he said. Daniel nodded respectfully before lowering his voice. "The board has been calling all morning. They are concerned because you postponed every meeting." Nathan smiled faintly. "They can wait another hour." Daniel looked surprised. "That is unlike you." "I know," Nathan answered. "Perhaps that is exactly the point." Evelyn approached the table carrying fresh coffee. She smiled at Daniel just as warmly as she had greeted everyone else. "Good morning. Would you like something to drink while you are here?" Daniel thanked her and ordered black coffee. She wrote it down with the same calm efficiency before disappearing toward the kitchen. Daniel watched her for a moment before looking back at Nathan. "She does not seem to recognize you." Nathan quietly stirred the last drops of coffee in his cup. "She recognizes me." Daniel frowned. Nathan continued. "She simply recognizes the person sitting in front of her instead of the headlines written about him." Daniel remained silent. Over the past 12 years, he had witnessed Nathan negotiate impossible deals, rescue failing companies, and make decisions that changed thousands of lives. He had never seen his employer speak with such quiet reflection. When Evelyn returned with Daniel's coffee, Nathan finally took a slow breath. "There is something I should tell you," he said. Evelyn looked at him with patient curiosity. "Yesterday, I came here dressed very differently." She smiled gently. "I remember." Nathan continued carefully. Everything about yesterday was intentional. Her expression remained calm. She waited without interrupting. "I wanted to know how people treat someone they believe has nothing." The words settled softly between them. Daniel lowered his eyes, suddenly understanding why Nathan had disappeared the previous day. Evelyn stood quietly for several seconds before speaking. "And did you find your answer?" Nathan looked directly at her. "I thought I would." He paused before smiling with quiet gratitude. "Instead, I found a better question." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "What question is that?" Nathan answered slowly, allowing every word to carry its full weight. "How many people have I failed to truly see because I was too busy measuring success instead of character?" The restaurant seemed unusually peaceful as those words faded into the afternoon air. Even the gentle clinking of dishes felt distant. Evelyn folded her order pad beneath one hand before offering a thoughtful smile. "The wonderful thing about questions," she said softly, "is that they usually arrive before change does." Nathan felt an unexpected warmth settle across his heart. Boardrooms had taught him how to build companies. Investors had taught him how to multiply wealth. Yet standing inside this modest neighborhood restaurant, a waitress had quietly begun teaching him something far more difficult. She was teaching him how to look at another human being without first looking at everything surrounding them. And Nathan understood that the conversation they had just begun would reach far beyond one meal, one restaurant, or even one extraordinary afternoon. The quiet conversation ended without fanfare, yet something invisible had already changed inside the restaurant. Daniel sat in thoughtful silence, turning Evelyn Carter's simple observations over in his mind, while Nathan Calloway looked through the front window at ordinary people passing by on the sidewalk. For years he had believed transformation arrived through dramatic speeches, ambitious plans, or bold decisions. Instead, it had entered his life wearing a black apron and carrying a coffee pot. Nathan reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed a small business card. He placed it carefully on the table, but kept one hand resting lightly over it. "I would like to ask you something," he said. Evelyn looked at him with the same calm attention she had offered since the moment they first met. "All right." Nathan smiled. "I own a company with more employees than I can remember by name. We build technology. We invest in communities. We support schools and hospitals. People often congratulate me for those achievements." He paused before gently sliding the card across the table. "But after meeting you, I realized there is one thing my company has never truly learned." Evelyn glanced down at the card without picking it up. The name Nathan Calloway was printed in understated silver letters beneath the familiar company logo that appeared regularly on business magazines and financial news. She looked back at him without any visible shock. Daniel blinked in surprise. almost expecting some dramatic reaction that never came. Nathan noticed it too. "You already knew?" he asked quietly. Evelyn smiled with quiet honesty. "I recognized your name this morning." Nathan looked genuinely puzzled. "Then why did nothing change?" She folded her hands loosely in front of her. "Because yesterday I met a man who needed lunch. Today I met the same man wearing a different suit." Daniel slowly leaned back in his chair. He had spent years watching influential people react to Nathan's identity with excitement, nervousness, or carefully hidden ambition. Evelyn's response felt almost impossible. Nathan laughed softly, not because the answer amused him, but because it freed something inside him that he had carried for far too long. "Most people become different after they discover who I am," he admitted. "I noticed," Evelyn replied gently. "They become careful." Nathan nodded. "Exactly." She offered another peaceful smile. "I would rather become honest." The words settled between them with remarkable simplicity. Nathan looked again at the business card still resting untouched on the table. "I came here intending to offer you a position," he said. "A leadership role inside one of my companies. Better hours. Excellent benefits. More money than this restaurant could ever pay." Daniel looked toward Evelyn with quiet anticipation. Anyone familiar with Nathan's organization knew opportunities like this almost never appeared without years of experience. Evelyn remained silent for a moment before asking only one question. "Why me?" Nathan answered immediately. "Because every company teaches people how to serve customers. You already know how to value people." Evelyn lowered her eyes thoughtfully. Outside, afternoon sunlight reflected across passing cars while the restaurant continued serving guests exactly as it had before this unusual conversation began. Finally, she looked back at Nathan. "I am honored," she said sincerely. "More honored than you probably realize." Nathan smiled warmly. "Then I hope you will say yes." Evelyn took a slow breath before gently sliding the business card back across the table. "Not today." Daniel stared in complete disbelief. Nathan did not appear offended. "Only curious." "May I ask why?" Evelyn nodded. "Because if I accepted simply because you are wealthy, then I would become the very person your experiment was trying to find." Nathan remained perfectly still. She continued softly. "If I ever work for you, I want it to be because I have earned your trust through time, not because one conversation changed your emotions." For several quiet seconds, no one spoke. Then Nathan smiled more sincerely than he had in years. He carefully picked up the business card and placed it back inside his jacket. "That," he said quietly, "may be the wisest decision anyone has ever made in front of me." As Evelyn returned to another waiting table with the same unhurried grace she had shown every guest that day, Nathan realized that true character could never be purchased, accelerated, or persuaded. It could only be revealed, one quiet choice at a time. Over the following weeks, life inside the little neighborhood restaurant continued exactly as it always had. The coffee was poured before sunrise. Regular customers stopped by for breakfast on their way to work. Families filled the booths on weekends. Evelyn Carter greeted every person with the same quiet smile, never mentioning the unusual conversations she had shared with Nathan Calloway. She had returned to her ordinary routine because, to her, kindness had never been an extraordinary event. It was simply a daily choice. Across the city, however, something remarkable had begun to unfold. During the first executive meeting of the month, Nathan surprised every senior leader inside Callaway Technologies. Instead of opening the presentation with financial reports, he asked a single unexpected question. "How many people did we make feel respected this week?" The room fell silent. Executives exchanged uncertain glances. No spreadsheet contained that answer. No quarterly report measured it. Nathan smiled gently before continuing. "Profit tells us whether we are successful. Respect tells us whether we deserve that success." Over the following months, small changes spread through every company he owned. Receptionists were encouraged to greet every visitor by name whenever possible. Customer service teams were recognized not only for solving problems, but for showing patience. Managers were trained to notice effort before pointing out mistakes. Hiring interviews began, including a new question that Nathan personally insisted upon. "Tell me about a time you made someone feel valued when there was nothing to gain." Some applicants struggled to answer. Others smiled as forgotten memories returned. Nathan listened carefully to every story. One quiet Saturday afternoon, nearly 3 months after their second meeting, A familiar black sedan stopped outside the restaurant once again. Nathan entered alone, wearing simple clothes that were neither expensive nor worn. They were simply his own. Evelyn looked up from the coffee station and smiled exactly as she always had. "Welcome back," she said warmly. "Your corner table is available." Nathan laughed softly. "I was hoping it might be." As she placed a cup of coffee in front of him, he reached into his jacket and carefully unfolded a single sheet of paper. It was not a business contract. It was not another offer of employment. Across the top, in plain black letters, appeared the new company principle that now hung inside every Callaway office across the country. "Everyone matters." Beneath those two words was a handwritten note. "Thank you for reminding me before I forgot forever." Evelyn read the page quietly before looking back at Nathan. "You did all this?" she asked softly. Nathan shook his head. "No." He smiled with sincere gratitude. "You did. I only listened." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The restaurant carried on around them exactly as it always had. Plates clinked softly. Fresh coffee filled the air. Someone near the window laughed. It was an ordinary afternoon, and somehow that made the moment even more meaningful. Nathan finally stood to leave. This time he paid for his meal before walking toward the front door. Just before stepping outside, he turned back one last time. "You know," he said with a grateful smile, "I came here believing I was testing the world." Evelyn folded a clean napkin and looked at him with the same calm expression that had first welcomed a stranger through the front door. "And what did you discover?" Nathan looked around the small restaurant before answering. "That the world was quietly testing me all along." Evelyn smiled, wished him a wonderful afternoon, and returned to serving another waiting customer without another thought. Nathan stepped into the sunlight, carrying nothing more valuable than the lesson he had found inside that modest dining room. Years later, people would praise his leadership, admire his generosity, and study the culture he created inside his companies. Very few would ever know where that transformation truly began. It did not begin inside a boardroom, at a shareholders' meeting, or during a billion-dollar negotiation. It began the moment one quiet waitress looked beyond appearances, spoke 3 simple words, and reminded a stranger that every human being carries a value no amount of money can ever increase or diminish, because true dignity is never earned by wealth, only revealed by the way we choose to see one another.